This video is a presentation by brain researcher Laura Boyd exploring how the human brain changes through learning, a concept known as neuroplasticity. She begins by debunking common myths, clarifying that the adult brain is constantly changing and remains highly active even during rest. The three types of brain changes. According to the speaker, neuroplasticity occurs in three fundamental ways when we learn something new. First, chemical changes happen rapidly between neurons, which facilitates short-term memory and immediate skill improvement. Second, structural changes alter the physical connections within the brain. Because physically remodeling the brain takes time, these structural changes are essential for forming long-term memories. Third, functional changes shift how and when entire networks of brain regions are activated based on frequent use. The importance of behavior and practice. The primary driver of neuroplasticity and brain alteration is a person's actual behavior and the volume of practice they perform. There is no shortcut. Facing difficulties and putting in consistent effort leads to greater structural changes in the brain. However, the speaker warns that neuroplasticity is a double-edged sword. While practice builds positive skills, engaging in negative behaviors or habits can also physically alter the brain for the worse. Individual differences and personalized learning. Through her research on stroke recovery, Boyd highlights that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to learning or rehabilitation. Individual brains are highly unique, meaning the time and amount of practice required to master a skill varies greatly from person to person. She suggests that just as medicine is moving toward personalized treatments based on biomarkers, education should also embrace personalized learning. Ultimately, every single experience and choice we make physically shapes our brain. The speaker encourages the audience to discover their own optimal learning methods, repeat healthy behaviors, and intentionally shape their brains in positive ways. This text explains the concept of neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to adapt and change throughout a person's life. It contrasts this modern understanding with the outdated scientific belief that the adult brain is entirely fixed and hardwired after childhood. The mechanism of brain rewiring. The brain functions like a dynamic power grid with billions of pathways that represent our habits, thoughts, and emotions. Frequently performing a specific action or thinking a certain way strengthens its corresponding pathway, making that behavior automatic and easy. Conversely, when we learn new tasks or adopt different ways of thinking, we carve out completely new neural pathways. As we repeatedly use these new roads, they become stronger and turn into second nature, while the older, neglected pathways gradually weaken from a lack of use. The text concludes with an empowering message that everyone possesses the ability to intentionally rewire their own brains. By applying repeated and focused attention toward a desired goal, individuals can successfully break bad habits and build new positive patterns of behavior.
Introduction to Neuroplasticity. This video explores the concept of neuroplasticity, which is the brain's lifelong ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. For decades, scientists believed the brain was fixed after childhood, but modern research shows it continues to adapt and change well into adulthood. Mechanisms and types of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is divided into two categories: structural plasticity, which involves physical changes like the growth of new neurons, and functional plasticity, where brain functions move from damaged to undamaged areas. When a person learns something new, neurons communicate through synapses to form or strengthen connections in key brain regions such as the hippocampus, amygdala, and prefrontal cortex. Importantly, neuroplasticity works both ways. It can reinforce negative thought patterns, but intentionally building positive habits can rewire the brain for the better. Benefits and influencing factors. Harnessing neuroplasticity provides four main benefits: enhanced adaptability, improved learning and memory, the ability to overcome negative behavioral patterns, and better recovery from brain injuries. While younger brains are naturally more plastic, older adults can still benefit greatly from a stimulating environment and new sensory inputs. Additionally, lifestyle factors like quality sleep, a balanced diet, and regular exercise play a critical role in supporting overall brain health. Practical strategies for brain rewiring. The speaker outlines 3 practical strategies to actively rewire the brain and build mental resilience. The first strategy is learning new skills, such as playing a musical instrument or acquiring a new language. The second strategy combines metacognition, thinking about one's own thoughts, with mindfulness, utilizing practices like self-reflection, thought journaling, and meditation to regulate emotions effectively. The third strategy involves engaging in brain-challenging activities like puzzles and strategy games to maintain cognitive flexibility. The video concludes by emphasizing that understanding neuroplasticity empowers individuals to take an active role in shaping their mental strength. Every thought and action has the potential to alter the brain, meaning anyone can build a more resilient and adaptable mind through intentional effort and a growth mindset. Introduction to Brain Plasticity in Rehabilitation. This video explains the concept of brain plasticity and its crucial role in physical rehabilitation. The speaker emphasizes that physical therapists must understand this neurological mechanism to effectively improve their patients' daily movements. The invisible changes in the brain. Brain plasticity refers to the functional and structural changes in the brain as it adapts to new environments. While physical improvements like muscle strength and joint mobility are visible to the eye, the invisible changes inside the brain are actually the true foundation of learning new movements. Therefore, simply training muscles without considering how the brain learns and adapts often leads to poor rehabilitation outcomes. 4 key points to applying plasticity. To maximize the effects of brain plasticity, the speaker introduces 4 essential elements for rehabilitation practice. First, providing an enriched environment by purposefully changing the location and tools prevents monotonous, robotic repetition. Second, encouraging patients to make active choices and actions, such as setting personal goals involving their family members, deeply boosts their motivation. Third, incorporating a sense of competition, such as comparing the patient's current data with their past records or national averages, helps them clearly visualize their progress. Fourth, the physical stimulation provided by the therapist must be highly appropriate and specific to the patient's ultimate goal. Understanding brain plasticity is essential not only for patients with neurological disorders like stroke, but also for those with orthopedic conditions. By thoroughly understanding a patient's personality and carefully designing the rehabilitation environment, therapists can effectively draw out the brain's maximum potential to recover and learn. The biggest lie about brain change. The speaker addresses a common misconception that every single experience a person has automatically changes their brain. Unless you are a very young child, this is completely false. The adult nervous system only changes when specific neurochemicals are released, allowing active neurons to strengthen or weaken their connections. The history of neuroplasticity. The foundation of neuroplasticity is largely credited to Nobel Prize winners David Hubel and Torsten Wiesel. Through experiments in the 1970s and 80s, they discovered that if visual input was blocked early in development, like closing one eye, the brain would completely rewire itself to rely entirely on the open eye. They proved that the brain acts as a competitive map where different sensory inputs constantly fight for space and representation in the brain. The critical period myth. Hubel and Wiesel popularized the idea of a critical period, the belief that significant brain rewiring could only happen during early childhood. They believed that if interventions for sensory deficits, like fixing a lazy eye, were not done early, the opportunity to rescue the nervous system was permanently lost. Proving adult brain plasticity. In the early 1990s, researchers Greg Recazzone and Mike Merzenich tested this critical period theory and proved that the adult brain is in fact highly plastic. In a challenging experiment, adult subjects were asked to touch a spinning drum with varying bumps and were required to press a lever when the distance between the bumps changed. The study found that as subjects paid intense attention to these subtle changes, rapid plasticity and structural changes occurred in the brain regions representing their fingers. The crucial role of attention. A key control experiment revealed the ultimate secret to adult neuroplasticity. Mere exposure is not enough. When subjects touched the bumps but were told to focus their attention on a sound, an auditory cue, instead, plasticity occurred in the auditory part of the brain, but not in the touch-related areas. Therefore, the adult brain only changes when you pay deep, specific, and selective attention to the experience you want to learn or adapt to.
Brain plasticity in musicians and prodigies. It remains unclear whether child prodigies or musicians are born with structurally different brains or if their brains change due to practice. However, brain scans reveal that musicians have larger brain structures in specific areas, demonstrating use-dependent growth or brain plasticity. For example, piano players show enlarged brain areas corresponding to the hand they use most frequently. The juggling study and adult neuroplasticity. A famous study published in the journal Nature proved that the adult brain is also highly plastic. When adults learned how to juggle, structural MRI scans showed significant growth in the visual spatial areas of their brains. Interestingly, once they stopped juggling, these brain areas shrank back to their original size, highlighting the use it or lose it principle. Aging, physical skills, and critical windows. While much remains scientifically unproven about the exact limits of neuroplasticity in the elderly, anecdotal evidence strongly suggests that physical skills, such as playing instruments or sports, are best learned during childhood. Learning these skills early in life allows for faster acquisition, easier learning, and a higher potential for ultimate mastery compared to starting in adulthood. Language acquisition and future research. Learning a second language becomes increasingly difficult as a person gets older, regardless of whether they are fully immersed in the culture. A fascinating and testable question for future research is whether growing up in a bilingual environment makes it easier for a person to acquire additional languages later in adulthood.
Brain plasticity and critical periods. This panel discussion explores the concept of neuroplasticity, highlighting the profound differences between human and animal brain development. While some animals are born hardwired for survival, human babies are born with an overabundance of neural connections that allow them to adapt to any environment. During our extended childhood, the brain experiences critical periods where it actively learns and prunes away unused synapses based on the use it or lose it principle. The balance between plasticity and stability. The experts emphasize that a healthy brain requires a delicate balance between plasticity, which is the ability to learn, and stability, which retains what has been learned. If the brain is too plastic and fails to prune unnecessary connections, it can lead to developmental disorders such as autism or schizophrenia. Conversely, if the brain loses too much plasticity, as seen in cases of childhood cataracts, it permanently loses the ability to process certain sensory inputs. Early adversity and emotional development. Research shows that a child's early caregiving environment significantly impacts their long-term emotional regulation. Experiencing severe psychosocial trauma early in life can actually accelerate the timing of critical periods, permanently altering how the brain matures. Reopening critical periods and rehabilitation. A major goal in neuroscience, often called the Holy Grail, is finding ways to safely reopen these critical periods in adulthood. Scientists are exploring pharmacological interventions and technologies like transcranial magnetic stimulation to remove the biological brakes on adult plasticity. When combined with physical or cognitive therapy, these methods show great promise for accelerating recovery in patients suffering from strokes or brain injuries. Natural enhancement and lifestyle. While direct brain enhancement devices exist, improving one cognitive function often comes at the biological cost of worsening another. Therefore, the panelists conclude that routine lifestyle choices remain the most effective and accessible ways to maintain brain health. Engaging in regular physical exercise, prioritizing sleep, meditating, and maintaining strong social connections naturally promote neuroplasticity throughout a person's entire lifespan. Introduction to Neuroplasticity and Real Experiences. This podcast episode features Dr. Michael Kilgard, a leading expert in neuroplasticity, discussing how the brain constantly rewires itself throughout life. He explains that while the young brain acts like a sponge, adults can also achieve massive neuroplasticity under the right conditions. Kilgard emphasizes the importance of engaging in real-world experiences with natural statistics, rather than relying too heavily on artificial stimuli like video games or endless social media scrolling. The core requirements for learning. Huberman and Kilgard identify 4 essential components required to drive meaningful neuroplasticity: focus, friction, rest, and reflection. Learning requires intense attention and a degree of friction or struggle to signal to the brain that the experience is highly important. After the event, getting adequate sleep and actively reflecting on or self-testing the new information allows the brain to solidify those new neural connections. Neuromodulators and the timing of plasticity. The exact timing of neurochemical release is what tells the brain's 150 trillion synapses whether to strengthen or weaken. When a person pays close attention to a specific task, a cocktail of neuromodulators like acetylcholine, norepinephrine, and serotonin is released. This brief chemical burst acts as a precise signal, locking in the learning for the specific neural circuits that were active just milliseconds before. Vagal nerve stimulation for rehabilitation. To help patients stuck with debilitating conditions, Kilgard's laboratory developed a tiny wireless vagus nerve stimulation device. By stimulating the vagus nerve during physical or cognitive therapy, the device subconsciously triggers the release of plasticity-enhancing neuromodulators. This closed-loop, targeted approach has successfully helped patients recover from strokes, spinal cord injuries, tinnitus, and severe PTSD by speeding up the brain's rewiring process. The complexity of brain diseases. The speakers agree that psychiatric and neurological disorders are highly complex and rarely solved by a single magic pill. Effective future treatments will likely require a customized combination of behavioral training, targeted device stimulation, and pharmacological support. Kilgard concludes on an optimistic note, stating that our growing understanding of brain synapses holds immense promise for helping humanity overcome severe disabilities. In the conversation with Dr. Michael Kilgard, there is a very interesting discussion about friction to enhance learning efficiency. Friction in this context does not simply mean struggling, but rather refers to the appropriate load and focus necessary to guide the brain into learning mode. Specifically, the following processes are important: focus and friction. To trigger brain plasticity, changes in neural circuits, you need a period of friction where you don't just passively absorb information, but actively direct your attention, think, and make an effort. This is a process of sending a signal to the brain that what we are working on right now is important. Reflection and rest. Rather than moving immediately to the next activity right after learning, intentionally engaging in reflection followed by getting proper sleep is essential for the consolidation of neural circuits. The importance of real experiences. Rather than simple information intake, providing the brain with what could be called living statistics, predicting, failing, and learning from it enhances the quality of learning. For example, practicing a sport or spending time waiting while fishing also functions as an activity accompanied by a friction to heighten concentration for the brain. In other words, it is explained that learning is not simply cramming knowledge, but a process where the brain faces new data and repeats prediction and correction, and the difficulty and focus felt during that process serve as the very fuel to optimally rewire the brain.
Introduction to Neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the nervous system's ability to change in response to experience, such as learning new things or forming memories. It is most active during nervous system development, but remains present throughout life, and it can also increase temporarily after an injury. Two directions of neuroplasticity: potentiation and depression. Neuroplasticity operates in two opposite directions: potentiation and depression. Potentiation occurs when the strength of information flowing through a part of the nervous system increases due to frequent use. Depression, which is unrelated to the emotional state, occurs when rarely used pathways grow weaker, decreasing the strength of information flow. Synaptic versus structural neuroplasticity. These changes can occur at two levels: the individual synapse, synaptic neuroplasticity, or the overall structure of the cell, structural neuroplasticity. With synaptic potentiation, a frequently used synapse becomes more efficient. The axon terminal may release more neurotransmitters per action potential, or the target cell may increase its number of receptors to become more sensitive. Conversely, synaptic depression reduces this efficiency by decreasing the neurotransmitter release or the number of receptors. Sprouting and pruning in structural plasticity. Structural neuroplasticity involves physically changing the total number of connections between neurons. When neurons fire together frequently, they experience structural potentiation, known as sprouting, where they grow longer dendrites, more branches, and extra axon terminals to form new synapses. When neurons are rarely active, they undergo structural depression, known as pruning, where they lose dendritic branches, axon terminals, or even the entire cell itself. Short-term versus long-term changes. Synaptic changes usually contribute to both short-term plasticity, seconds or minutes, and long-term plasticity. However, structural changes like sprouting and pruning are heavily associated with long-term potentiation and depression, taking months, years, or even decades to develop. Ultimately, neuroplasticity is the fundamental mechanism that allows the brain to wire itself during development, form memories, and recover from damage. Synthesizing the numerous research data on neuroplasticity we have covered, such as Dr. Laura Boyd's emphasis on behavior, Dr. Michael Kilgard's focus and friction, and Dr. Kelly Lambert's effort-based rewards, we can see the optimal learning methods to physically rewire the brain's circuits. When we evaluate the 4 skills of language learning, listening, reading, speaking, and writing from the perspective of neuroplasticity, clear differences in their effectiveness and roles emerge based on the cognitive load, or friction, and the extent of brain areas involved. Here is an evaluation and explanation of the effects each skill has on the brain from the standpoint of neuroplasticity. Listening. Plasticity effect.
low to medium. The auditory cortex is activated to recognize sound patterns and their statistical properties. As Dr. Kilgard noted that passively showing foreign language videos to babies has no effect, simply listening without engagement generates no friction in the brain. Because acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter for learning, is rarely released, the brain circuits hardly change. How to enhance the effect? Incorporate prediction and testing. By listening while predicting what will be said next, or by summarizing the content immediately after listening, you create focus and friction, which dramatically boosts the learning effect. Reading. Plasticity effect. Medium. The visual cortex recognizes letters, and the language areas, like Wernicke's area, comprehend the meaning. It is superior to listening in that you can proceed at your own pace, making it easier to generate friction by guessing unknown words. However, when you are reading silently and smoothly, running on already established neural circuits, new circuit construction, learning, is barely occurring. How to enhance the effect? As Dr. Kilgard preached the importance of testing, practice retrieval practice. By closing the book after reading a page and trying to recall what was just written, you generate intense friction in the brain, anchoring the memory into long-term storage. Speaking. Plasticity effect. Very high. The prefrontal cortex, thinking and planning, motor cortex, controlling the muscles of the mouth and tongue, and auditory cortex, feedback from your own voice, operates simultaneously at full capacity. It has an overwhelmingly high learning effect. Similar to Dr. Lambert's worker rats experiment, where rats that dug holes to earn rewards developed healthier brains, the act of physically moving your body to generate output is the greatest effort, or friction, for the brain. The struggle of not being able to recall the word you want to say, friction, and the process of squeezing it out strongly bind the neurons together. How to enhance the effect? Speak within real human interactions. By receiving feedback through the other person's facial expressions and reactions, the living statistics of natural world, the cycle of prediction and correction spins, causing the brain to recognize the information as vital for survival and strengthening the circuits. Writing. Plasticity effect. Very high. The advanced cognitive function of structuring information is strongly linked with the fine motor function of moving the hands and fingers. It is just as effective, if not more so, than speaking. Specifically, it has been scientifically proven that handwriting requires far more complex motor commands than typing, thereby providing rich stimulation to the brain and dramatically increasing the memory retention rate. The very process of erasing mistakes and rewriting acts as powerful feedback and correction for the brain. How to enhance the effect? Write out what you have learned by paraphrasing it and summarizing it in your own words. This is the very act of building new neural bridges, or rewiring, between what you already know and what you have newly learned. The ultimate combination learning methods to maximize neuroplasticity. Based on the evaluations above, to most effectively rewire the brain, you must not stop at mere input, but must convert it into the motor movement of output. The rule of neuroplasticity is that easy learning does not change the brain. The very moment you feel a cognitive load is exactly when your brain is rewiring itself.